kaua o li ko laulan. O akalei hau pe hoa pili kaua haau. Pulu pe I o I kala au la au kupu mala kalamaku e ulua e nei. Kamalu kukui ka iwi ula. Lilo a paai hali I ka moe na alolua halali. Kua hele mai ka aina wahine noho makaloa. Eia ka aina, eia ka ia, eia ka hale no kou ka hale hakumawana ka lei ohu pukui. Aloha ia nā li ia mamaulo, loloa ka punai ulu kou ka moa. E mai ka hale a, aloha mai. Pelina ia o ko pakahi apau. O Marques Hanalei Marzan. My name is Marques Hanalei Marzan. I'm Bishop Museum's Cultural Advisor and the Curator for Cultural Resilience here at Bishop Museum. And I welcome you all to this program that we have here, Heola I Kaleo Kāhea, a program to honor the practices of our kupuna in memory of Mary Kawena Pukui. But at this time, I'd like to pass it off to Pele Honuamea, Mary Kawena Pukui's great-granddaughter, to share and begin the program. Aloha.
Mahalo nui a oe, Hanalei. Aloha nui kako. Mahalo nui ko kako akua ana I keia hale o ka hale ho iki o pihopa. It is my absolute pleasure to join us in this beautiful hale, this beautiful place that takes care of our mea makamai, the things that our kupuna have left for us, and to celebrate the continuing of this series, Nānā ʻike kumu, in honor of my great-grandmother, Mary Kawena Pukui. And today we're going to be having a conversation. We're going to learn about these oli practitioners sitting before us, and hopefully leave a little more enlightened about one of these very important cultural practices. So again, my name is Pele Honuamea Harmon, and I'm very, very honored to be your moderator today. We're gonna get started by introducing our panelists, our distinguished panelists. And I also wanted to, Nalela, although they need no introduction, here to my immediate right is Dr. Kalena Silva. Kumu Kalena, what I call him, is a respected scholar, educator, and cultural practitioner in the field of Hawaiian language and literature. He is a professor of Hawaiian language and the former director of Kahaka'ulo Ke'elikolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. Dr. Silva was among the early pioneers of the Hawaiian language revitalization movement and helped shape higher education pathways grounded in Olelo, Hawaii. He is also a highly regarded oli, chant practitioner, having been mentored by the late Ka'upena Wong, one of Hawaii's most celebrated masters of traditional chant. Known for his disciplined delivery and deep cultural grounding, Dr. Silva is recognized for perpetuating oli as a vital form of Native Hawaiian knowledge, ceremony, and expression. Anui ko mahalo ya oe e kumu kalena ko ai ana I keia hele ana mai ki ala. Mahalo nui. Oh, you guys switch seats. So he's actually not to my right. Mahalo. Ai pa'i lima. Now to my immediate right. Well, actually, I'm gonna lele ya Hanalei paha. Marques Hanalei Marzan is a cultural advisor, and Wayne Pitluck and Judith Pyle curator for cultural resilience at the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, Hawaii. He is a distinguished visual artist, chanter, cultural practitioner, and kumuhula. Raised in Kaneohe on Oahu, Hanalei was trained in traditional Hawaiian chant by respected kupuna John Keola Lake, a mentorship that is central to his approach to cultural stewardship and ceremonial practice. In his role at Bishop Museum, he guides the development of exhibitions, educational programs, and community outreach outreach by bridging ancestral practices with contemporary interpretation of fiber arts and cultural resilience. He regularly leads workshops, presentations, and demonstrations that animate traditional materials, forms, and protocols in public and cultural institution contexts. Kalamai. Aloha nui e Hanalei. Mahalo. And finally, ko'ohoa o Keliʻi Ruth. Keliʻi Ruth is a lecturer and doctoral candidate at Kahakaʻula o Keʻelikolani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. He also works at the College of Education's Curriculum Studies Department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where he contributes to the Hawaii State kāhea assessments for Kaiapuni students. Keliʻi is a skilled practitioner of Hawaiian chant and has been mentored by Dr. Kalena Silva, a respected leader in traditional Oli and Olelo Hawaii. His work bridges education, cultural practice, and indigenous language assessment to support the growth of Olelo Hawaii across generations. Miki aloha nui a oi e Keliʻi aloha paʻipaʻili makako. And before we delve into today's talk story, our panel discussion, I also want to acknowledge the team that has been key to putting on this series. So we have she's hiding behind a pillar over here, Miss Taylor Chang, if we can all acknowledge Taylor. She is part of the Bishop Museum, and your official title is something, the Luna. She's just the boss of everything. No, of events. And so Taylor, as well as Kaha'i, is somewhere over here, or maybe he's in the back. Oh, Ihopeala. Okay, Kaha'i. And at some point, hopefully, we meet regularly to kind of plan out these events. And so also the staff from the archives and library here at Bishop Museum have been very instrumental in providing some of the materials as well as the references that we use. So at some point I'll introduce if their team is able to attend today. However, so the format is gonna be, I just wanted to kind of, we have people that are visiting, looking at the hale. We're going to have our panelists kind of talk about their training in chant. That'll be the first part of our gathering here today. And everyone's mo'olelo, everyone's story is of course unique. Their training as well as their the way in which this art form has been transferred and taught to them by their kumu. So we're gonna talk about that. And then we have some questions that I will pose to the panelists, and they will answer if they have mana'o about those different questions. And then towards the end, there'll be an opportunity for the audience to also ask questions of the panelists. And so be thinking about your ninau, your questions, what you might want to ask of them while we're having these discussions. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for that. So I think we're gonna start off with, I'm gonna ask Ka'okumu, Kalena Silva, if he would start us off this morning or this afternoon in talking about his training as a Oli practitioner. Mahalo.
Aloha mai kākou, aloha. It is a great, I feel humbled and honored to be able to speak today about a really important topic among Hawaiian cultural practitioners today, and that is the idea, the activity that is the transmission of cultural knowledge and practices. And so I'm really, really very happy to be here to speak with you today, and very humbled again by this invitation from the Mary Kawena Pukui Cultural Preservation Society that has invited me to come to speak to you about this very important topic. All of us, cultural practitioners and scholars, owe so much to Mrs. Pukui, who really brought forward the foundation of our cultural knowledge in Hawaii today. Really, Mrs. Pukui was a preeminent Hawaiian scholar of the 20th century into the 21st century. All of her work continues to inform what we know and do today. I'll talk a little bit about my training with Kaupena Wong, who was Mrs. Pukui's student. So I'll start with their training first, Mrs. Pukui and Kaupena's, and then a little bit about my training with Kaupena, and then a little bit about training that I've been doing with a student, Keliʻi Ruth, who will speak to you in a bit. And then maybe at the very end of my short presentation, I'll speak just a little bit about my remembrances, fond memories I have of my association with Mrs. Pukui. I had 5 teachers in Hawaiian performing arts, traditional Hawaiian performing arts. My first was when I was at the Kamehameha schools, and she was Ho'olu Richards. After I graduated from Kamehameha, she and I entered the Halauhula Maiki, and we have Colleen here with Auntie Mikey's daughter here with us today. So pleased to see her. She was my second teacher. And then also after her, I went to Kauizurumeister on the windward side of this island to study with her and her daughter Noinoi Lani. Pretty much at the same time, I began studying with Kaupena Wong, who was Mrs. Pukui's student. And so these teachers, oh, one more, I almost forgot, Auntie Localia Montgomery. I studied with her informally, not formally as did Mikey, Auntie Mikey, but toward the end of Auntie Localia's life, I had some really very important, I think, opportunities to talk with her, speak with her about traditional Hawaiian performing arts and the like. So those are my 5 teachers. Of the 5, 4 concentrated on hula. And so I did learn chanting from them, but chanting associated with hula mainly. But when I went to Kaupena, I was able to learn mele not totally associated with hula, and not only associated with hula. And so I really appreciate the foundation that he gave me, because he allowed me to gain more knowledge in different areas, different vocal qualities, chanting styles, different kinds of mele, not only associated with the hula, but in different contexts of Hawaiian life. So I really appreciated the foundation that he gave me. He told me about a little bit about his training with Mrs. Pukui. And speaking with people of his generation and others, I did learn that he comes from a family of performers. His mother was a hula ku'i dancer, very good one. His father was a very good musician and singer. And so he was raised in a household, Kaupena Wong was. He was raised in a household where he heard music, he saw dancing, he had family and friends that engaged in these Hawaiian activities. And so as he grew up, the interest, I think, was kindled in him. He went to the Kamehameha schools, as I hear it from some of his peers, like Noilani Kanohomahoe. She told me that he went to Kamehameha and was encouraged, especially by Don Kilolani Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell was, those of us who went to Kamehameha in the latter part of the last century already, will remember Dr. Kilolani. He encouraged all of us with any interest at all in Hawaiian things to continue research and to continue finding out more about our Hawaiian cultural heritage. So Kaupena was encouraged by Dr. Mitchell to continue his interest in Hawaiian things. And I think it was Noilani who told me that it was Dr. Mitchell who actually took him to what used to be known as the Honolulu Academy of Arts. I can't forget what the name is. Is it the Honolulu Museum of Art? Yeah, right, okay. So those of us who live in Hawaii, we know it used to be the Honolulu Academy of Arts, but I think it was in the late 40s, Iolani Luahine danced at the Honolulu Academy of Arts. And so Dr. Kilolani Mitchell took Ka'upena, because he knew of his interest in Hawaiian performing arts, took him. And he was so moved, Noilani was telling me, by this performance of Iolani, that he wanted to be a part of this cultural tradition of our people. And so it continued. He went abroad. He went to the mainland, to Iowa, to Coe College for his undergraduate studies. And I think he graduated with a degree in political science. So unlike Ka'upena, I have no idea why he went into political science, although he was rather political, but that's another story. At any rate, he came back with a degree in political science, and then, was wondering what to do and so on. His parents were friends with Mrs. Pukui. They knew Mrs. Pukui. And so his mother, Ka'upena's mother, knew that Ka'upena was very interested in Hawaiian performing arts. And so she encouraged Ka'upena to just go to the house and maybe just engage in some general discussion and conversation about Hawaiian cultural topics. And so, introduced by Ka'upena's mother, Ka'upena met Mrs. Pukui. And what started off as very general kinds of discussion about Hawaiian topics of interest to Ka'upena and Mrs. Pukui, why there was a burgeoning interest Mrs. Pukui could see in Ka'upena in Hawaiian performing arts. And so after a while, not long, evidently, he was approached by Pele's grandmother, and this is the daughter. I know there's too much genealogy for those of us who are not from Hawaii, but for those of us who do know, you might appreciate that Mrs. Pukui's daughter also, Pele, was a dancer. And so Mrs. Pukui wanted a ho'opa'a, or a drummer chanter, for the dancing of her daughter. And so here Ka'upena was coming to the house, and so she thought, well, we can ask Ka'upena if he would like to be groomed, trained, to be the ho'opa'a, the chanter drummer, for my daughter. He was approached, and he said yes. And so in 1952, Ka'upena began training with Mrs. Pukui. From 1952, 12 years, to 1964, that was the period of training. And he told me that in his training with Mrs. Pukui, what he learned wasn't determined by his level or rank as a student, which is what happens today, isn't it? Those of us who are engaged in Hawaiian performing arts, we are olapa, we are ho'opa'a. If we're lucky and work very hard, we become kumu hula, or teachers of hula. There are these ranks that we have. But it wasn't that way with Ka'upena. He told me that wasn't the case. He said, whatever items or selections that Mrs. Pukui wanted to include in a performance, that would be the mele he would learn. And so his first mele, he told me, were associated with hula because of his being the ho'opa'a, or the chanter drummer from Pele. And the first mele hula was E hoi ke aloha i ni'ihau. And then the first meleoli he learned was Nohoana kia kua I ka nā hele hele. And these are mele that are still done among hula practitioners today. So those are the very first two mele he told me that he learned, and those because of his association with Mrs. Pukui's daughter in performances. So that continued again for those 12 years. And he told me about the training. He said that in her training of Ka'upena's voice, she never brought up vocal qualities or specific kinds of vocal production, but she had an interesting, I think, a really interesting kind of exercise that she said that she learned when she was studying chant with some of her kumu, her teachers, and that was this sound, uza, 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 uza. And she said Mrs. Pukui would have him do that, and he would do that in order to develop that kind of chanting voice that we all see, which is kind of nasal, produced here in the head with lots of sonority and the rest. And apart from that, there really wasn't any other vocal training he had except for imitating her. She would model whatever mele it was he was to learn. He would chant it back, and it would go back and forth until she was satisfied that he was producing the chant in the way that she thought was appropriate and good. And so this is basically how he learned over that 12-year period. And he told me that although he learned quite a few mele as ho'opa'a for Pyle, by far, he told me, he thought that Mrs. Pukui, because she saw in him his ability in chanting, she gave him quite a few mele that didn't have anything to do with hula, that had to do with mele pule, prayers, that had to do with mo'oku auhau, what do you call these genealogies of our ali'i, mele noa, name chants for our ali'i and akua, kanikau, ho'aiai, those kinds of chants that normally you don't get in a halau, that you don't receive in a halau setting. She saw in him his ability and so wanted to kind of spread his wings out beyond just hula. And I think he always appreciated that. And in his own teaching of myself, he thought that it would be best for me not to learn hula things, hula selections, but to learn poetry that had to do with other aspects of Hawaiian culture. I think that Ka'upena had a very great, how should I say, appreciation and love for our elders. Not a lot of people know that toward the end of his life, he became a practical nurse. And he actually, and he told me he did this because so many of the elders that he had in his younger days and in his youth had given him so much that he felt that when he got older, and this is when he was in his 60s and 70s, he was working at the Ahi Hospital as a practical nurse to provide care to the elderly there. And not many people know also that he cared for his mother, who lived till about 98. He cared for her until her last days. And I remember the two of them, so very cute. She would come with him wherever he went. And she was a little forgetful. And he was a bit stern with her. But the love between the two of them was really just so heartfelt. He was such a good person. I felt, and I do feel, so very, very privileged and happy that I had the opportunity to study with him. And so I guess maybe that gets to, I should say one more thing maybe about his study with Mrs. Pukui before I get to my training with him. She gave him 3 kapu that he should, what do you call those, rules, I guess you could say, that he needed to follow in his career as a performing artist. One was that he should never wear black. So whenever he performs, whenever he would perform, he never wore black. And there were 2 leis that he would never wear. One was a lei hala of the pandanus fruit. The other was lei avapuhi. And I didn't really ask him about the lei avapuhi, ginger leis, which have such beautiful fragrances, and people love to wear them, but he would never wear them. And I didn't really ask him why, but then I think maybe it's because of the puhi in the Hawaiian word avapuhi. Puhi means to burn. And, Hawaiians, when we, and this is another kapu, another rule that Mrs. Pukui told him about, and that was he should not give away his performance leis. And so he never just threw them in the bin or gave them to someone. He said, when you finish with your performance and you have leis, like I do here today, I'm so blessed, he said, you can do 2 things. You bury it or you drift it, let it drift out to sea. And so I followed that myself because this is the kapu that he laid upon myself and that Mrs. Pukui laid upon him. So basically those 3 things: never wear black, don't wear hala or avapuhi, ginger leis, and never give your performance leis to anyone, but make sure that you dispose of your leis carefully and correctly. Okay, then I guess we get to myself and, my own family. Although we have a mele in which Kaleni Opu'u is mentioned and that has been passed down to the generations in my family. The people who really were part of the performing arts in the 19th and centuries and before died away. And so in my own family, we didn't really have anybody who continued the traditions, the performing arts traditions. That's why I feel doubly blessed, because I had people like Kaupena and others of my hula teachers who saw something in me that they allowed me to learn from them. But I remember very clearly, I was about 6, maybe 7 years old, and many members of my family, I'm not sure how many of you know about the Hawaiian civic clubs, but many members of my family, we're from Waianae, on the leeward side of this island. Many of them are involved in the Hawaiian Civic Club movement and members of the Waianae Hawaiian Civic Club. So every year, and this is in the 60s, 70s, and I'm assuming up to today, because the civic club still exists, every year there would be an annual luau, aha'aina, where all of the civic clubs from all over Hawaii would come and meet for a luau gathering. And so this particular year, I was about 6 or 7, the luau was held up at Wahiawa in the Wahiawa Armory. And so we went, my aunties and my uncles, and the place was just packed. And after we had finished eating, I noticed that the lights were being brought down. And then we began, I didn't see her, but I heard some chanting coming in from a door off the side of this large building, which was the armory. And then my grandma was sitting right next to me. And so I said, Grandma, what is that? And she said, she just did this. Listen. That's all she said to me. So I didn't say anything more after that. This woman chanted. And, you know, in Hawaiian, we say, ilihia, ilihia. You just, you get a chill up your spine. You feel so moved, because the chanting sounded like nothing I had ever heard before, and it just spoke to me. It resonated in me. And so she kept on chanting. She got onto the stage, and then I noticed that there was a young girl with her. I found out later that was Auntie Kau'i Zurumeister and her daughter Ku'ipo. They chanted. They danced. Hula pahu, hula ala apapa, hula olapa. It was just beautiful. I was mesmerized. And so I didn't know it then, but that's when this interest started. I went to Kamehameha and began studying in the concert glee club. You know, we learned how to sing. We also learned how to chant to a certain degree. And then I began studying with Ho'olu Richards, who was working there as an advisor, Hawaiian cultural advisor at Kamehameha schools at that time, Kapalama. And then after I graduated, 1971, from high school, both of us went to the Halau Hula o Maiki on Ke'eomoku in those days, at the corner there. Those of us who are part of the Halau will remember that place dearly, on the 2nd floor. At any rate, this is where we started, where I started learning with Auntie Maiki, and then graduated from her in 1972 as a dancer and a chanter drummer, and then the following year in 73 as a kumu hula. I'm indebted to her and the halau. At any rate, coming back to my study with Kaupena, around the same time, just after graduation from Maiki, I was at the university and was studying chant. I had taken all the chant courses that were offered, not many at the time, but one or two, I took those. And then I was told that I could maybe study with Kaupena, who had actually taught in the 60s, Ho'olu, among his students. And so I thought, wow, if I can study with Kaupena, I would be delighted. And so the university arranged with Kaupena my study with him for a semester. He didn't come to the university. I went to his home. He was living on Date Street in Kapahulu at the family home there. And I studied with him for, 14 weeks, I guess it was. We met once a week, and about 2 hours each time that we met. And when we met, he told me that we wouldn't be doing any hula. We might do hula at the very end if there were time. He might teach me a moloka ikui, but if there were time. But it turned out there wasn't time. And so he decided, and I brought what he taught me, just a note here, he taught me 2 oli, ohana kumoku, nohoana kia kua I kana hele hele, that one that he learned first from Mrs. Pukui. He taught me a ho'ai, which is a chant about lost love, and then a kepa kepa called Kanalu Nui, and then a ho'owewe, which is a lament. Now, about this last chant, this ho'owewe, I'd like to tell you an interesting story he told me. He said that although Mrs. Pukui taught him these different styles of chanting and these different kinds of poetry, she did not teach him the ho'owewe, or the lament, of the dirge that in that particular chanting style. And so I was curious. I said, why? And he said that he thought that perhaps she didn't think it was appropriate to chant in that style, even if to teach him, because it might incur or make occur death or some kind of misfortune. And so she didn't teach him how to do that particular chant style, but he did teach me that style. And so I asked him, well, how did you learn it? And he said he remembered the old folks. And he gave me an example. I think, if I remember correctly, his sister died at a very young age. And he took one of his aunts to the grave site where the sister was buried. It had been a year since she had been buried. They got off the car, and the auntie started to ue. She started to just cry. And she said, and he told me that he patterned his chanting of these mele kanikau and uehelu after the chanting that he heard, chanting you could call it, the wailing that his aunt did at the gravesite of his sister who had passed away. So really interesting kind of cultural practices, some of them taught and then some of them not, but just learned by being around ohana, like he was with his family, and that ho'owewe, of the lament that he learned. Kaupena taught me, I think, very much in the way that Mrs. Pukui taught him. Mrs. Pukui and Kaupena did this with me too. Before giving me a mele, a piece of poetry, he gave me the Hawaiian, typed, oh no, he wrote everything out. He didn't type. So everything written out, and then a translation by Mrs. Pukui of the poetry, and then a paragraph or two explaining, maybe sometimes with notes. Mrs. Pukui did that for him. He did that for me. That's how I got all of the mele from him. He wrote everything out. And then, like Mrs. Pukui, he didn't talk to me very much about Hawaiian vocal qualities or vocal production. I listened to him do it. We were in his living room. He sat in a comfortable chair. I was on a couch. And he would just model the different mele to me, and I would chant it back to him. And we went back and forth until he thought that I had achieved the correct way of chanting whatever mele it was we were focusing on that day. It was sometimes, I have to admit, it was, he was picky. He was very picky. And at the time, I guess I would admit I was a little bit, what's the word? Not irritated, but I thought, well, you know, I'm kind of doing it the way you're doing it. And I didn't say that to him, but I thought that. And of course, he didn't think I was. And so he would just, okay, do it again. No. And so I learned very quickly humility, I think, not to take for granted that I could just learn things very quickly. He taught that to me, I think, very, very successfully. He didn't, what's the word, require me to do that vocal exercise. I didn't have to do that, although Mrs. Pukui had him do it when she was teaching him. He had an interesting way of teaching. He was seated the whole time on his chair, and if he really began feeling, I think, the poetry, he would begin to kind of move his shoulders like this, and then kind of like with his hands and fingers just move them like this, but not gesturing in any specific way symbolic of the meaning of the words in the, like you might do in hula. Yeah. So just general kind of movement, and he would get into that every now and then when he was particularly feeling the chant that he was teaching me at the time. So after that semester, that pretty much was the extent of our meeting in person. But over the years, up until he passed away in 2022, we kept in touch. He loved to write letters. And while I was away at school in the University of Washington in Seattle, he would write me letters about, he would include clippings of his letters to the editor of the Hawaiian Star Bulletin at the time. Because he had very definite ideas politically about things that were happening in Hawaii at the time, and so he would share them with me. He was kind of proud that he was able to do that statewide in the newspapers. But along with that, his political side, he also provided these mele. And oftentimes, in response to particular events that I was to be a part of. For example, at UH Hilo, I had just started in 1984, and we were to bless Kanaka Hall. And so I called him up and said, you know, Kaupena, what kind of a mele pule prayer chant should I use to bless Kanaka Hall at the University of Hawaii at Hilo? And he says, I have something for you. I'll send it to you. And so he would send me mele like this for different. He sent me a mele to plant a tree. And so we planted a tree. I think it was near Spalding Hall on the University of Hawaii campus. So I had called him, asked him, do you have a mele for planting a tree? And he said, yes. And so he gave me that. And you know, several different kinds of poetry in different kinds of cultural contexts. So that continued over, what, the 50 years, I guess it was, since we first met in 1973. So, so many good memories of Kaupena and his instruction to me. Maybe one last thing about my training with him. Although I think a lot of people regard Kaupena as a font of traditional knowledge, and he was. I think he saw himself more as a performer than he did as a scholar necessarily, although I think he was a scholar, and many people would say that he was. I really believe that he enjoyed performing. He really enjoyed performing. And he told me toward the end of his life, I never really understood this, because I always thought, well, you know, he knows so much. He has all of this very scholarly kind of academic, really, background that he's able to bring together with his performing ability. But I was not able to understand what it was. He would tell me, I'm a performer, Pyle. I'm a performer. I said, oh, okay. Until he told me he enjoyed performing very much because he really enjoyed being able to see people moved by his performances. So when he was able to touch people with his beautiful voice and his exquisite knowledge of our different cultural practices, he really was moved by that himself when he moved other people. So finally, toward the end of his life, I think I understood why he felt that he was more of a performer than a scholar of Hawaiian chanting. And also, because one time he did tell me, he said, you know, Pyle, I hate teaching. And I don't know why, but he taught me, you know, somehow he saw something in me. But anyway, okay. Before I talk about this fine young man here who's about to get up to speak with you, I've been talking much too long. I did want to tell you, in my own performance practice, I have, I think, maybe 3 or 4 sources that really sustain me up until today and have for many, many years. One of them, of course, is the training that I received from all of my teachers, Ho'olu, Auntie Maiki, Auntie Kau'i, Auntie Lokalia, and of course, Kaupena. My allegiance to them is just so strong. But I've also go back to and thanks to the Bishop Museum and their publications, CD publications, I've also gone back to listen to the old folks. Nā makahelu makaena, ilala ole, kuluwai maka, all of these fine chanters who lived before any of my chanters, any of my teachers were even born, some of them. So I went back to those and also had what they left in the recordings inform my own performance. And then also scholarly writings by people like Elizabeth Tatar, going back into Hawaiian language newspapers to read what Kamakau had to say, for example, about a person who was skilled in chanting, because he left quite a bit for us in the Hawaiian language newspapers. So those are basically my major sources that, until the present, really helped to inform my own performance practice. Okay, now just a little bit about this young man. He'll introduce you and talk about his own experience in chanting better than I can, and he will. But I must tell you that over 40 years now, I've been teaching at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, and I've had students come to learn hula, to learn chanting, also singing as well. And so I'm really happy to teach these things to young people who are interested. I met Keliʻi through a friend and a former student of mine, Lehua Matsuoka, and she is here today. I'm so happy. About 10 years ago, I think it was in 2015, she called me and she said that she had a friend, or there was a student at University at Manoa who was interested in learning about chanting, and that he wanted to meet me. And so we met at Starbucks, the three of us, and that's how I was able to meet this fine young man, Keliʻi Ruth. I was impressed by several things about him at that meeting of ours at Starbucks. One was his maturity. Another was his stated interest, which was very deep, I could tell, in Hawaiian chanting and Hawaiian culture in general, and Hawaiian language. And I think that coupling, his great interest in chanting, but also his great ability in the Hawaiian language. He's a very, very good speaker of Hawaiian language. That really helped to kind of sustain an interest in me, in him. And so after that meeting in 2015, we were able to secure a grant that allowed him to fly to Hilo for about 8 months. He would come on Saturdays. This was in 2016. In 2016, he would fly up on Saturdays for about 8 months, and we met at my home. Kind of like I did with Kaupena at his home, but Keliʻi met with me at my home. And I taught him one hula, I think, but the rest of it, and he can tell you what he learned from me maybe, but not too much in the hula realm. And so I was very pleased to have him as a student, and I'm very pleased to turn the mic over to him now.
Mahalo for allowing me to start with that mele. I wanted to go ahead and begin with that for two reasons. The first is a way to honor the first guest to sign the guest book to enter into the Bishop Museum, and as we all know, that is our Queen Lili'uokalani. And Tisoro Brown actually spoke a bit about that at the last Nānā ʻike Kumu series, and so I felt it appropriate to honor her because it really underscores her recognition of the importance of this place in maintaining and perpetuating, who we are and our identity. The second reason is for this topic that we are discussing today, which is the oli and how it comes down from each generation. And that was actually a mele that was given by Mrs. Pukui to Ka'upena and then to Kumu Kalena, and I was fortunate to learn that mele in 2017. And so I felt it appropriate to begin there, recognizing our queen, but also recognizing Mrs. Pukui for all of her work, because her legacy is very much tangible. You know, we continue to read it, we hear it, and we continue to chant it as well. Thank you for allowing me to speak a little bit about myself and my journey in chanting. You know, in reflecting on my life and what really led me to chanting, I do have to say that it was connected to my interest in Hawaiian language. When I started as a student at Kamehameha Kapalama as a 7th grader, that's when I took my first Hawaiian language class, similar to what Kumu Kalena was sharing earlier. My family were mele people generations back, but you know, as time went on, some of that kind of faded away a little bit. So I didn't necessarily grow up with chanting or hula in my immediate family. But once I enrolled in Hawaiian language class at Kamehameha schools, that was where I learned my first mele oli. And that first mele happened to be O Nauna I Kahala Me Kalehua, one of Mrs. Pukui's compositions. And from that moment, I was immediately hooked at what we could do with our voice. You know, there are so many, when we think about chanting contexts, we can use our voice to welcome someone into our home, welcome someone into the classroom, begin a gathering, and we can use it to grant access. We can use it to honor someone, as we did, as we heard with that mele inoa for Lili'o Kalani. And at a young age, even though I didn't necessarily know every single word in that mele, the function of the mele and what we could do with our voice was what really intrigued me. And throughout my journey as a Hawaiian language learner, throughout high school, I was able to continue to kind of foster that interest in myself through certain opportunities. And I was speaking with Kumu Kalena earlier because I later realized in preparation for today that a lot of the mele oli that I learned throughout my high school career could be traced right back to Mrs. Pukui and her research and pulling out certain mele that she felt was appropriate for us to continue to sustain and maintain today. How's this? Oh yeah, much better. Shall I start again? No. And so some of those mele were mele for Kamehameha, you know, mele inoa for Kamehameha. One particular one, Mele Inoa no Kamehameha, that was actually recorded by Ka'upena on the record, Mele Inoa. Another one was Yava Anui, one that Mrs. Pukui pulled out for use at the dedication of Hokulea that just celebrated 50 years. That Ka'upena led with the help of Kumu Kalena and Keliʻi Tau'aha. And so throughout my journey, I was continuing to grow in my interest for chanting. When I went to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, I continued to find opportunities to grow in that way. I probably took every single mele class they offered, both at Kawaihuilani and Kamakakuokalani. But really my path to chanting really began through a relationship with someone Kumu Kalena mentioned earlier, and that was Auntie Lehua. She's a graduate of Auntie Elaine Ka'opawiki of Lanai, and she did study with Kumu Kalena back in the 90s. And it was really through her that she introduced Kumu Kalena and I to each other, and that's really where the journey began. And that was back in 2015, and I'm blessed to say and fortunate to say that I am a student of his and to be able to learn from him. You know, I'm able to stand here because of this very steadfast kumu and very, you know, caring mentor and influence in my life and in the lives of many of us. When I began training with Kumu Kalena, and you know, in listening to what he was sharing earlier, a lot of it is exactly what he was doing when he was teaching me. He would sit on his couch, I would sit on one, and he would model, and I would imitate, ho'opili, you know, and do my best to achieve the sounds that he was doing. And that type of learning in that face-to-face, healo type of learning is very important, I recognize, because it allows for immediate correction. It allows for the teacher to hear if the student is grasping what they're teaching. And then it allows for the student to get feedback if they're doing it right at all. You know, and so that type of learning is very important, and it extends back generations, and it's a style of learning that we must continue to perpetuate moving forward. My time with Kumu Kalena is interesting because he's taught me completely in Hawaiian, you know. So all of our lessons were completely in Hawaiian, and Kumu Kalena would always underscore the importance of listening to our kupuna. So not only did we have our own lessons in learning how to chant and learning certain mele kepa kepa, oli oli kaholo, oli oli i'i, ho'ai, but also he stressed the importance of listening to the recordings that we have and going back to our kupuna and listening to how they produce these sounds, how they utilize their voice in all of these different functions. And you know, that has really been one of the guiding thoughts in my life in terms of how I continue to look at Oli, is going back to our kupuna and listening and seeing how they were doing these chants. And I think that's one of the pieces that I reflected on in terms of what Mrs. Pukui has given to us today too. You know, we received a nice set of mele, right, from antiquity. But we are also today looking for opportunities to revitalize new mele. We're looking for opportunities to revitalize new contexts, chanting contexts, perhaps places where we can utilize meleoli. And Mrs. Pukui, through a lot of her work, especially in those mele collections, she would not only annotate certain words or phrases that would perhaps be esoteric to us today, but she would also share certain contexts of those mele. If she knew if somebody else had that particular mele as well, she would write that in her notes on the mele, really kind of guiding us to seek in multiple places so that we could get the best picture that we could about that mele before we went ahead and revitalized it or used it today. And so I very much appreciate all of the work that she's done in those mele collections, because it's through her work that we get to understand more about those types of, we get to understand the context of mele. But with the audio collections, we're able to hear what it might have sounded like, and we can use both of those collections to then allow it to live in a new way today. And so a lot of that influence from Mrs. Pukui is definitely felt today. And we continue to turn to her in our work as chanters to ensure that as we revitalize mele, as we continue the mele that she's given to us, we continue to do it in a way that is ours, in a way that is how our kupuna did it, and we can maintain that for the future. I was reading in preparation for today. I went back and I started to read a lot of Mrs. Pukui's work again. And one of her papers that she published, she wrote about the mele of Ka'u. And there's one line in there that she wrote that has stood with me for a very long time. And it's actually aligned with a lot of what Kumu Kalena has shared with me. And that line is, "Aia apuka ke mele I waho." And she was speaking about a particular mele that had a lot of kauna in it. She says that the kauna wouldn't actually take effect until the mele is performed in front of an audience. And so that's really a really big lesson that we have to maintain today, that these mele are meant to be performed and that we give them life through performing them. But it's also a warning as well in some ways, that if we don't be careful in how we do it, or we grab the wrong mele, right, we have to be extra careful about this. But aia apuka ke mele I waho, really underscoring the importance of performing these mele and making sure that they live. And being able to study with Kumu Kalena has allowed my voice to do that, and has given me the tools to ensure that we can continue to perpetuate chanting into the future. I was thinking about a couple of other things that Mrs. Pukui shared with us, but I know we're going to get into it a lot more. So I'll end there. Aia apuka ke mele I waho, really giving life to our mele through our voice, and knowing that we can sustain this tradition into the future. Mahalo nui.
Le o nai he kukina I o kōlalo leo leo walo no ia he leo pākāhea ke kupola wahi ni māla o lelo I kule ana ki whamai I leo kōkolo ana I ke veo nā kupuna o ia he I o kahino kākou au hea o koe nā huahana u ka I pukahama e uno noho mai ana I ka halele wā e hea ne ki pa o ko māko alo kupuna kai o ni kana wei mua o ko māko uhai ai ki alalo o puhalau o ko māko I ke veo ke kaulapi o kahi kāko I ke aloha o ke aloha mole nui.
Aloha nui o kopakeki. I began with an oli taught to me by my Kumu John Keola Lake, and how he shared it to me was that this was a chant that recognized the pilina between all of us, that we are one ohana. Even though we might come from different places, different families, if we go back far enough, we are one people, one ohana of Hawai'i, of this aina, and to remember that. And so I recognize my kumu, as I carry with me him always, and all of the kupuna and haumana of halau mele that stand with me and give me the strength and support to be here, to carry on the legacy of his teachings that have been passed to me. Kumu Lake came into my life when I was going to the University of Hawaii. So well into my later teens and early 20s. Growing up, I did not have my close connection to my Hawaiian roots, as my grandfather passed away just a couple of months before I was born, and the only Hawaiian connections that I had was through the stories of my parents and my uncles and my other relations, extended family, and sharing with me the history of what he was and the things that he did. He was a great fisherman, water person, But it wasn't until a lot later, after I started learning with Kumu Lake, that I heard about the stories of his mother and his father and his grandparents, and how they all were kahuna la'au lapa'au, kahuna la'au kāhea, different forms of healers that use their voice and pule in different capacities to bring life and heal relatives and members of the community. And my uncle, he recounted a story of when he was being raised by my great grandmother in Ho'onaunau. As a young boy, he lived with her for 5 years, from when he was 5 to 10, and he talked about different stories of my tutu walking around the garden, talking to the plants and to the stones and everything around in a voice, not just her speaking voice, but he as a young child, he said she was singing to all of things outside, and he didn't know what she was doing, and every time he would ask her about what she was doing, she always told him, "That's not for you to know. That's not for you. You don't have to worry about any of this that I'm doing." And also when there were storms and different kinds of events, he remembered these different things that she would do. She would place stones on different things when a storm was coming, or put away things that were the color red, depending on these different things happening at that time. And he again asked her these questions. Why are you doing these things? And he said, she told him again, this is for me to do, and I'm not going to put that kuleana on you. She's basically saying that. She's like, this is not for you. I'm doing this, and it'll end with me. So hearing these mo'olelo that were passed to me later on, after being exposed to the teachings of Mike Kumu in Oli, and then later on in Hula, it reminded me that the things that drew me to Oli and Hula were far deeper than just myself. It was something that has been in my ohana for generations, that has reawakened within me, and I take on that kuleana wholeheartedly, and want to be that connection for my younger nieces and nephews and people within my ohana that now have an ability to ask those questions and connect and make those connections within our ohana, and I'm able to share that with them. The reason why I originally reached out to Kumu Lake to learn Oli was through an art practice. My art practice as a visual artist. I was traveling to Aotearoa for the first time with one of my mentors in art, Maile Andrade, and she was invited to an indigenous art gathering in Aotearoa, and brought along some of her students with her. And in that moment of invitation, she told us that we had to prepare, as she knew from previous experiences in Aotearoa that the Maori community were very strong in protocol, in ceremony, in song and dance, and she wanted us as the representatives of Hawai'i to have a strong grounding within ourselves in those areas as well. So we reached out to one of actually Maile reached out to one of Kumu Lake's students at the time, Keliʻi Ruth, who shared a series of Oli to help us build a repertoire of things that we could use in our ceremonials exchanges with our Maori cousins. And through those few chants that were taught to us, it really inspired me to go deeper and want to learn more from the source. And so Keliʻi mentioned that Kumu Lake was his kumu, and he continued to have papa, oli, and hula at Kamakakuokalani at the University of Hawaii at Manoa at the time. And so I reached out to Kumu Lake, and Kumu Lake really embraced everyone that was interested in learning. He never turned away anyone that had a desire to understand more about our mo'olelo, our culture, our stories, our dance. So he welcomed everyone to be a part of the halau, and I'm so grateful for that he welcomed me into that space, and as I began, in his papaoli and going every class, it was kind of intimidating because he would teach oli very quickly. And he would call on the haumana to do the oli, and of course, hearing it one time, expecting us to be able to do it, and doing it by ourselves was kind of pu'iwa, very scary to try, and maka'u to feel like that, to be put in that situation. But he didn't intend us to know it fully. He wanted us to do it as much as we could. He gave us those opportunities to feel what it's like to not really know, but in a space of safety. Yeah, not out in the public, not out in a place where you would be put. You would be kind of embarrassed if you were to do something wrong, but to be within in the setting. And he's like, "Oh, Mike Kai, you did what you could," and we went to the next person. And so it was a means to kind of build people's confidence in themselves in a safe setting. And when we got to those moments when we were in the public's eye, or in ceremony or protocols or performance, we were more comfortable with ourselves and how we conducted ourselves, how we grounded ourselves and made ourselves prepared in those different moments. So, Kumu Lake has always been a pai, a platform, a foundation for me, being my only real kumu of oli and hula. That's something that I'm so grateful and honored to continue the legacy that he has shared with me. Kumu Lake was an active community member here at the Bishop Museum, assisting in the development of programs and exhibition spaces and consulting with staff in different ways, and I continue that legacy here, with my presence as a staff member alongside all of my colleagues, and I try to mimic and continue the legacy that he built as a cultural knowledge holder and keeper for Hawaii here at the museum, and I offer that to all of my colleagues willingly, and I hope they realize that I'm always there for them in whatever that they do, and they always have someone to be able to ask and get some advice and support in that way. So. It's been a long journey. I've been here employed at the Bishop Museum for the past 23 years in various capacities, and continue to share my understanding and insights that have been passed to me with my colleagues and friends, as well as the researchers and students and community members that come to the museum to want to learn a little bit more about the mea kupuna that we steward and care for here, but also how we, much like what Kumu Kalena and Keliʻi mentioned, how do we bring life to those things that we steward and care for? How do we honor those practices in presenting them so that their voice can be heard once again? And I think that's also another thing that my kumu afforded myself, as well as all of the haumana that learned from him. He taught different things. He taught mele hula, as well as chants for all forms of daily life activities, for agricultural blessings, for marriage ceremonies, for house cleansings, ko'i honua, the genealogical chants and the kanikau, the laments. But he gave us all of those tools and learn and sharing that. But he also gave us insights on how to create new oli and mele, grounded in those, using those mele from our kupuna as our source, so that we continue our new mele and songs and dances and mo'olelo with an anchor point within our past and within our cultural systems and history, so that we honor and continually build upon those deeds and practices and works of our kupuna, so that the kupuna of the future, our mo'opuna, and all of those people that we look to in the future will have a stronger foundation than where we are today. Yeah, so that we continue to build and not regress and try to rebuild, but continue to build, so that the next generations and future generations continue at a higher level than we are today. So I know, much like Keliʻi said, I know we have a number of questions that will be asked, so I'll stop here, and we can continue the rest of the program. Mahalo.
Ay, mahalo. This is the junk one. No, mahalo nui. I have so much, there's so much to unpack. And before we get into the questions, I just want to acknowledge as all of our panelists were telling us their mo'olelo, their story about how they were taught by their kumu. Kumu Kalena was the chair of my thesis paper, and so I'm very, very thankful and to just the scholarship and the level of excellence that he demands of us, his haumana, and listening to Keliʻi, and then Keliʻi came into my life through Kumu Kalena, because as part of his performance at the end of his training, this formal training, which there's never really an end once you have that relationship with your kumu. One of them was going to be the songs that you had to chant was hula pahu. And so, if Kumu Kalena asks to dance, which is one of the great loves of my life, is to dance hula, then of course I'm going to come and make all the practices. And so that was the first time that I met Keliʻi. And I went home and I told my husband, mai ka'i no kona leo. I mean, to hear that in a young person. And he just told me he graduated in 2010, which is I'm still getting over. Marques and I are classmates, 1997. So we graduated last century. Keliʻi is a very recent graduate, so he's very young. But like Kumu Kalena said, his maturity in continuing these things. And I just thought back to, as you were mentioning, Auntie Lokalia's name and all these, Uncle Pena, how fortunate we are that these mentors and these kupuna and puna and tutu pukui, how they took care of these things, and then they also were very generous in sharing these things with us. And so that's what brings us here today. And so to acknowledge that. And I had a lot of what was mentioned was the functionality of chanting, right? So Kumu Kalena also taught 3 of us in Hilo how to ho'ola ahale. And so that, at the time, I was so appreciative, and I still am. But then you become the ho'ola ahale for everything. And I thought, oh, okay, yeah, pikino. And just, I always mahalo, even my little times when I was working my graduate paper with sitting with Uncle Pena and talking story with him. And he always spoke so fondly of Kumu Kalena and talked about him and my grandma Pyle as well as being his pallies. And so anyhow, if any of you were able to go back to your training, because it was interesting when you were saying that Uncle Pena would tell you to do hana ho, and being a haumana of yours on several occasions, learning hula, you would tell us to hana ho too, and always very kind of nicely, but I would think, oh God, I just don't want Kumu Kalena to lose it on us. But certain of the other classmates would just never caught on to the nonverbal mannerisms. I'm like, you gotta hana home because you're doing it wrong. And he's not gonna say that, but anyhow, if we could go back and do it, especially for you Kumu Kalena, do it differently, what would you, or go back to the beginning of your training, knowing now what you know, what perhaps would you have done differently, if anything, while you were going through your training, especially with Uncle Pena, but with all your kumu?
Okay. Well, mahalo for that question. Wow. I'm not sure I would change anything if I had to do anything differently. I have so much aloha and respect for those old folks because they were teaching at a time when, not unlike today, people weren't really interested in these things. I mean, the 70s, yeah, they call it the time of the Hawaiian Renaissance, when there was a renewed interest in Hawaiian things, but it was just beginning among a very small percentage of people in Hawaii, and certainly not like today. And so I really have a lot of respect for those old folks because in spite of in Hawaiian we say, what is the word, palaka? We say palaka, palaka, indifferent. A lot of Hawaiian, my own family, I have a brother and sister, they were palaka. And it wasn't their fault. We were raised in a family that had lost a lot of this. These cultural practices and knowledge, and so they, my brother and sister and others in my family weren't interested at all, really. So I have so much aloha and respect for those kumu, like Auntie Maiki, like Auntie Lokali, Kaupena, who, in spite of it all, taught us because they realized the importance and the value of it to our people. And so I think if anything, if I would change anything, I would change, I would have listened even more to them, yeah. Because, you as a young person, you feel like, oh, he's telling me to do it again and again and again, oh God. But, I look back and I think, maybe I could have, listened even more, yeah, so.
For me, I think maybe the one thing that I would change is that I didn't ask that many questions because I knew, I was trying to be very respectful and you don't ask, you just sit and listen. But the people that gave me their aloha and ʻike were very willing to share. And so when I did ask a particular question that I felt that was really specific and meaningful for me, they were very generous and open and willing to share that ʻike. So, I always felt like, I don't want to be maha'oi. I don't want to be asking all these questions and just making a list of questions and just trying to get all of these answers. But I think if I could go back, I would ask a few more questions than what I did, because I think the things that were shared with me were so meaningful and insightful, and have become foundational to what have been who I am as a practitioner and keeper and culture bearer today. That maybe just getting a chance to ask a couple of more things to get that other areas that I still kind of have questions on. It would be what I would do.
I want to just add something to that because, as we sit here in Pauahi Hale and Mama Darling, Patience Namaka Bacon this was her life's work as well. And that was one thing that she told me, and I think Native Hawaiian local people were very aware of that fine line between respect and then also wanting to ask questions, and you don't want to ever go beyond the, what is considered maha'oi. But as we lose so much of our knowledge, then we are realizing that, we do have to ask in a very mindful way and respectful way of our kupuna, because I remember Auntie Pat telling me when I was doing my interviewing her, and she said, never ever ask a kupuna to teach me everything you know, because it's very similar to wishing death upon them. And so us being able to navigate and remember these kinds of things that are integral to our cultural knowledge, but also not overstepping or inadvertently doing something that is disrespectful to our kupuna. I think that's asking questions. What about you, Keliʻi?
No, mahalo. I do remember how afraid I was to ask my first question. But, in reflecting on this question, I came to an experience that I'm glad happened, and I would have been sad if it didn't happen. And I kind of answered it that way as I was reflecting on it. And it was to be able to teach in front of Kumu Kalena. I had the opportunity to co-teach with him, and that's another kind of opportunity for learning even for myself, to have him in the room, to watch what I'm doing, and to be critical of it, to ensure that what I pass on is exactly as he shared it with me. And so I'm glad that happened, and if it didn't, then that's what I would have wanted to be different. But I'm grateful that I had that opportunity. And my journey is still being written, and I still am able to call Kumu and ask for advice and guidance, and he continues to mentor me and train me in that way. And so that's one thing I was thinking about, was being able to be in the room with him and have him there to watch that.
Yeah, we cannot be maka'u of the criticisms from our kumu, because that's given with aloha. And I thought, oh, okay, that is if Kalena said he would have listened better, oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like so many times I was just telling him for the 50th anniversary of Hokule'a, I was fortunate enough to be down at Kualoa Ranch when he was talking about, the launching of Hokule'a and the details that he shared with the audience about how many of which particular material was gathered, and what the chants that were done, and the preparations that went into the launching, and I thought, oh gosh, he can remember all of that from 50 years ago. Same thing when it came to Uniki with Auntie Mikey, and we talked about that, because at one time you had Mama Darling come up to Hilo and talk about her hu'elepo and her graduation, and the details of, what Uniki entailed for Kumu Kalena. Not just the memory, but the notes that I think you take is a very good example of what we should do. And I also want to mention and mahalo the OEV TV crew, because I think that's another thing as we hold this series, is to document. And a lot of times I found that we're in the moment. But when I think about Puna and Mrs. Pukui, she talks a lot about learning from her kumu, but taking notes, writing. And then when she went out into the field, she learned how to utilize the technology of her day, whether it was the tape recorder, it was, she also, I really believe she had a photographic memory in many ways, but she never took for granted the use of the technology that would allow her to go back and look over her notes or re-listen to these interviews and transcribe them. And so that's another thing. I wanted to ask each of you, do you have a particularly favorite kind of oli or a song in particular? And why that would be your favorite kind of style of oli?
Okay. I don't know that I have a favorite. I have some chanting styles that I kind of fall back on because I'm comfortable with them. But, recently, maybe within the past some years now, since I met Keliʻi and started teaching him, when he studied with me those 8 months, we went through the whole program of mele and styles that I thought I would teach him. And then he learned them all. Well, I mean, he's still, he's still boiling within him. What's the word? He's cooking them up still. They're not completely. But anyway, me too. But at any rate, we went through them all. And I thought, okay, we still have some time. So I want to do this chant style that I don't feel comfortable doing because it has this very difficult vocal quality that I hadn't really mastered. And we call that i'i ho'anu'u. And so I thought, should I do it or not? And I thought, okay, I should. So I taught it to him. We listened to Kuloi Makama, Lucy Ka'ilima, all of the old folks, because, these vocal productions we can talk about, but I always feel if I cannot go back to these old recordings and say, this is this and this and this is what we call this is it. Can you hear it? Can you do it? Because I need to do it too, right? So we went back to this, to all these recordings of Olioli'i. And so Ikea Kaukini, I taught him that. Well, he taught himself really. Well, both he and I were learning at the same time. So now I would say that one of my favorite types of mele are those that can be chanted in this Olioli'i style, or Olioli Kanainai, which is somewhat different. The Olioli Kanainai has a lot of what we call anu'u. And then the i'i ho'anu'u. That's a part of the stuff. And I was never comfortable with it, but I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it. And then, Keliʻi is, he's good. Yeah. So, anyway, those, yeah.
That was going to be my answer too. Was the Olioli'i. Yeah. I think because it's not often heard today too. It's very rare to hear the Olioli'i, as well as a second. They're all favorites, but the second one that I would probably address is the Hawai'i, which is such a personal expression of aloha from one person to another. It talks about departed love, a companion who left and perhaps went to another, or went on a journey and left you behind and whatnot. So it's very personal. That the mele itself is so personal. You get to see a glimpse into how that person felt, how they expressed their love, but the style of chanting as well, with the elongated vowels, and it really adds to that feeling of sorrow. But yeah, it's the i'i, the Olioli'i, and the Hawai'i.
for me, actually. The whole is something that I gravitate to a lot as well. But another style is the kahoahoa style that I also gravitate to, as that requires a group, because it's a call and response. Yeah, which means that you have a hui, or a community, a group that is familiar with this particular pule or mele, and can do the call and response. So it's not solely upon an individual, but it's a kuleana that exists between multiple people in that. So that recognition that I have learned from my kumu the things that have been taught to me, but being there with someone else that can share that kuleana, I think is something that's very meaningful for me, because it means that it lives on within someone else. It's not just myself. Yeah, and to know that is very important to me.
So this is a good segue into my next question, which is, you talk about the different styles of oli. Are there perhaps, and then you kind of segued, you alluded to it as well, different styles that are more appropriate for certain situations? Because we're all, the mele is olelo, right? We don't have mele if we don't, it's not just sounds, it's actual content and a certain poiapilia, a certain reason for or background story to why the particular mele is composed. And so what would be, like, would there ever be a mismatch? Like, you wouldn't do a kepa kepa for a certain kind of subject matter, or is it up to the meaoli? What is not appropriate, or perhaps more appropriate for certain situations?
Another good question. And you bring up kepa kepa, which is that conversational style of chanting. And that was probably the most, what's the word, ubiquitous? I mean, just the most common of all the chanting styles. And something I really try to impress on my students when I'm teaching chanting or singing is that the main thing, the absolute main thing to remember about Hawaiian poetry is the poetry itself. So the words, you go to that first. And then how you deliver it with this style or that style is a choice that you can make. Now, as in my own understanding and having read through some of the old writings about this, there were certain styles that were associated with certain kinds of activities. Like this olioli'i that we're talking about, evidently was very much a part of kilu, which is that game that the royalty enjoyed playing. I'm not sure how you would characterize it in English. Anyway, shenanigans. I'm not sure. Well, yeah. Men and women played yellow cloth. Anyway, it was a game of romance, you might say. Okay. So evidently that olioli'i I've read was associated with that. And so there were certain kinds of chanting styles that were associated with certain kinds of activities, but I think the first consideration of those old folks was the olelo of the mele, that first. And then they would then decide what kind of vocal style to attach to the mele, to the words.
Okay, I know we're running for time. I just wanted to also, well, one of my questions, but we'll see if maybe the audience brings it up. As Kumu Kalena was talking about, and it was brought up, o nauna I kahala, and I've learned that in several occasions that mele that was composed by my great grandmother through halau growing up, but also you don't know So I have a funny story. When my daughter was studying my oldest in Japan for a few months, and we went to go pick her up from Japan. We met her at the pier, and she was coming home on a boat from Ogasawara. And I just, you know, as a parent, you kind of know what your child walks like. And she was about 16, I think, when she went on this exchange for a few months. And she was on the 3rd floor of the boat, and we were in the harbor standing there, and I could tell just by her gait that was her. And so I started chanting to her, "O Nānā I kahala," and that was I think the one point that I understood, to have those hali'a about missing somebody and then thinking about them, and then there they are right in front of your eyes. So I'm chanting to her and I'm crying, and she hears my voice all the way from the boat, and she starts running. I see her running down the stairs, and she's running, and we both, puliki and hug each other, and we're crying this reunion. Now my other kids go hide because they were like, because people started, filming, and they thought, these Japanese people, I don't know who they are, but they just started filming because something was happening, and it seemed cultural or of sorts, I don't know. And so the other two were hiding, and she and I were ugly crying, and we were holding each other, and I chanted until she came to me, and she understood the words too. But the funny thing was, when they reappeared, the two younger ones, they said, "Mom, don't ever chant to us like that in a public place." And I thought, I told them, don't worry, because she's my favorite. So no chance of that ever happening. Anyhow, to talk about the function of chant and the content of the mele itself, and then how we connect that to renormalize these situations, whether it's greeting a loved one who you haven't seen for a long time, or just honoring somebody in a place like this in Hale Pauahi. And so I mahalo all of you for continuing this very important practice, and with your leo, and sharing these stories with us. And so I want to open up the question time to the audience. And if there are any burning questions that you need to ask, or you would like to know about, as we sit here in the presence of these practitioners, now's the time. O kia kawa.
And if you raise your hand, I'll get a mic to you so we can hear. Yeah.
Mahalo for you folks' presentation today. I think one question that I've always wanted to ask of people who are learned in chant is how and do we want to, how do you make people who are unfamiliar with chant become comfortable with chanting? So if we talk about normalization, how do we make them comfortable? And do we even want to? Do you want the uncomfortables to not even chant? Or, those kinds of nino. Mahalo.
Responding to that question, I just think about my kumu, being one that was so willing to teach anyone, even though there were haumana that did not have the greatest leo. He continued to teach them, and I think that's what I try to manifest and continue in my practice. There will be those that have the most nahe voice, or that have the leo ikaika, that have all of those forms, and everyone has their own place. Yeah, I believe that. I think if we can get people that have the understanding and awareness in their minds, we all can support each other in that way. Yeah, even though we might not have the same leo, we have the same understanding, the same mana'o that we can support and build up and pass on to the next generation. So, I think that's for me, teaching anyone that has an interest, or even maybe people that don't have an interest, just giving them the awareness and understanding of those things is equally important to the actual execution.
All right, mahalo. I think I would just add that, in the olden days, everyone chanted. Everybody engaged in this type of practice at different tiers, in different ways, depending on their family's occupation, perhaps, and the mele pule that they would have done. And so if we're looking to kind of get back there again, everyone chanted. And so I think the biggest piece to that would be Oka'olelo Kamilanui, making sure that the language is correct in doing it. Yeah.
I would just add one thing, really good comments. I would just add one thing. I think as our language gets stronger and people understand the meaning of these mele that we do, and they also appreciate the context, the settings in which these mele are being performed, their importance, their value, then they'll come around. Even if it sounds kind of weird to them, I think those of us who speak Hawaiian, it doesn't sound weird to us because we understand what the mele are saying, what they mean. And we understand their importance to the various settings in our lives that we perform these mele. So I think maybe the strengthening Hawaiian language now that we're seeing, which is so gratifying, I think that's really going to help in people's appreciation.
Mahalo for your time today. My question is that how do you create new mele? What is the sort of the brief process of doing that?
To create text or to create text? Yeah, no, that's an occupation. That's a skill called haku mele, and people train in that. People are taught to haku mele, which is to create new compositions. And so, some people it kind of comes a little easy. Others it takes a long time to refine that skill. And part of haku mele and composition requires a very high level of language to know exactly what you're weaving together into the text, making sure that everything is auspicious. And everybody will be, the mele itself, depending on its context, can, bring life to everyone there and not the opposite. And so you need to be kind of trained in it, and really taught in it to be adept.
And I want to just add to Keli'i, my kumu was very adept at haku mele and haku vale, like ulu vale, right at this moment, creating something that's specific to this space, the people gathered here. And it's, I think, much like Keli'i and Kumu Kalena said, it's because my kumu had the depth of understanding of all of the things that make up our world that have been embedded into our pule, our mele, our oli, and the understanding of our kupuna. We speak about, when we talk about a place, we don't just talk about the physical name of the place. We talk about the wind. We talk about the names of the rain. We talk about the plants and animals that live in this space that make this place what important and special. So drawing upon all of those elements would be enough for someone that understands the language to know about where they're talking about without even naming the place. Sometimes just those references to those significant things of those places would be enough for someone to understand where they're talking about or whom they're talking of. So, I think that's something that I think having practice and training in knowing all of these things of daily life, haku mele can weave together all of those elements. So really is being a scholar of all of places, the animals, plants, and of everything around us, and having that wealth and depth of experience and knowing makes it so much easier for a haku mele to actually compose something that speaks to that. And I think having also training in all of the mele and pule of the past, you see how our kupuna created. There's a format on how our kupuna kind of brought together all of these elements within those compositions, and that's what we can use as a framework to build upon with the modern understandings and places and things that we speak of today.
I want to add something to that. All new compositions are going to be based on old ones. And so having a strong foundation in what the characteristics of a certain place are, and you want to incorporate that, weave it into your mele. The other thing that's really important to the process, at least for myself, is paka, which is having your work critiqued by someone who is experienced in that particular skill. And so oftentimes, if I write a mele, then my go-to is either Larry Kimura, Pyle was my Kumu, and I ask them to be very honest about my word usage, whether it follows traditional patterns of song composition, and then also, and then I listen. So when they give me that critique, then it's really important to ho'olohe, to listen to that and to change it. You cannot just decide like, oh, I don't like what they're saying, and so I'm just going to keep it as is, because that is very, I think, disrespectful to the person whose help you solicited in the first place. And so that's another part of our process in creating other new compositions, is to take criticisms and incorporate those criticisms to make it better and to make to fine tune your composition itself.
Well said.
This question's for Hanalei. My kumu kilohana taught us Oli Kaulei, which she said you co-authored. And the chant was to give thanks without saying mahalo. So it's an Oli mahalo without saying mahalo. So how did you come up with this? How long did it take? I mean, did you just kind of brainstorm over a couple hours, or was it a couple weeks, or how did you do it?
Kulani ha ko I ka olu e kau mai ka awamo ke kule ana ha awe velehia ka umeke heke ie kaua koko le hua ka pu I loko nei aki ke pamo I kua hia kai pu pawe aia I una pihano ke opu Halau ka hue wai e kau lei ka awamo I hapai kau kono e alo a he alo I ke aloha.
So that is the Oli Kaulei that I composed alongside my Halau brother. Actually, one of the compositions that I was tasked to do when I underwent my uniki as a chanter in Halau Mele. and really the task was to create a oli mahalo, and I wanted to create something that did not use the word mahalo in it, but the way I did it was the visual imagery that I acknowledge within the oli, being the symbol of what appreciation and thanks and recognition represent. Yeah. So in giving thanks, it is an acknowledgement that something is given, and you are saying thank you as a reciprocal response. So within this oli, it speaks of a carrying stick, an awamo, and a carrying stick. How it functions is it has two ends, two baskets or two vessels that are placed on the carrying stick, and the bearer would have it on their shoulder, and the balance of the carrying stick is based on what is in each of the containers on this carrying stick, and that's how you would be able to transport your ukana, your mele, the things that are important to you from place to place. So in this composition, it speaks of an awamo and how a gift is when a gift is presented, it is placed on the awamo. Yeah, it can be a physical gift that is given. It can be aloha. It can be a mele, and an appropriate response is an acknowledgement. Oftentimes, in some ceremonies, you have a physical gift to return in as a response, and sometimes you don't. And from my teachings, your leo is enough. Yeah, in that acknowledgement, and so. In this acknowledgement, there is a umeke that is gifted and placed on the awamo, and the thing that I offer in return is my leo of remembrance and thanks in the form of a huewai, a water bottle that is placed on the other end, something that will always remember the exchange at that moment, and that. And in that offering, it balances out the awamo. It becomes balanced, and is now able to function properly. So that's a composition that came to me during my year-long preparations of undergoing uniki. But it was one of multiple chants that I had to compose during that time period, and it's really based on the training of my kumu and how he made us understand that thinking about the visual imagery is very important. Yeah, and seeing it in your mind and how it gets conveyed to someone else, and hopefully they can see that same imagery in their minds through the words, is how that particular chant came about. It actually didn't take very long, for me at that point. I just understood that I wanted to have these symbols represented in this way to offer as an acknowledgement and of appreciation and thanks, and the idea of always remembering, being the commitment, the gift that is being placed in that huewai, to continue and perpetuate that gift and ola of that moment. So that was the intention of that composition, and I have taught that to many of the haumana within my halau, and now have continued as starting to share beyond the bounds of halau mele in different communities and spaces. And hopefully it become much like what we were talking about, much like it brings life, it has life in different contexts and different spaces, beyond where it began. Yeah.
think this is a great context. And as the next question comes up, and I think this is going to be our last question, when we talk about functionality of using our voices, I think it's really cultural to want to say something. We don't just leave a conversation and then dig out. You have to say something. And so creating chants that portray that sentiment of mahalo is an adaptation for a context that we see today. My son, who was studying in the Midwest, he said, "It's the weirdest thing, Mom. Like, people just start talking to you, and then you think you're like, you haven't even answered or really like finished your conversation, and they leave." And he's like, growing up in Hawaii, we are used to saying aloha to people, and then you don't just leave. You acknowledge that the conversation has come to a conclusion. You say something like mahalo, or you say malamapono or ahuio. But he said not in the Aina Haole. It's very different. And so maybe that's a context, a modern context in which, we do want to acknowledge, it's time to leave, but I have something that I want to say. And so I'm going to do this mele of mahalo. Last question. Do we have any other questions? Oh, Maikai, mahalo.
Just a quick one. Mele is chanting. The main instrument is the voice. So when you are performing mele in chanting to an audience, do you incorporate other tools to help the audience get more out of the performance? Such instruments of other than the voice, or is it just strictly the person's voice that you use? There was somebody was playing some kind. It sounded like maracas, Oh, that was upstairs. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was part of the chanting.
That was my mental note. I'm like, next time we have something in here, we need to take the pu'ili and lock it away.
I thought that was
pu'ili. But
I thought that was part of your chanting. I thought, oh, that's cool.
Oh, good. It sounded. And this is just my mana'o to that. Throughout my travels in Polynesia, the leo, the voice, is always the thing that has greeted me, whether it be in Marquesas or Aotearoa or Tahiti. It's that connection of the voice and hearing people welcome you that has always really kind of touched my soul in a lot of ways. And because I understand our language even more so, I really, really listen to what's being chanted. When Marques opened up, then I knew that he was chanting about, I heard Ka'ua Ha'au, which is the rain in Ka'u, where my great-grandmother comes from. And so creating those connections to why we're here today, it's really important to me. The voice is enough. And that's the most important thing whenever we're in a cultural context. You can have accompaniment, and mele is, we have things that we use to complement the mele, whether it be ukulele, more modern instruments, guitar, or even when you're dancing hula kala'au, and the dancer is chanting, but they have the sticks that are keeping rhythm as well. Those can be complementary, but I feel like the leo, the voice, is a thing that is it's lava. It's most important. And I love listening to my Kumu Kalena, Keliʻi, to Uncle Pena when he was chanting, to all the old Kuluwai Maka, the old tapes, and to hear, knowing how difficult it is to accomplish some of the vocal stylings that they're able to really, it seems very effortless. I have a great appreciation for that, and that's the thing that I kind of lean into, and I think I appreciate that there aren't other things kind of getting in the way of that. But that's my own personal preference. Pyle.
For me, I'm thinking about mele, the songs that are accompanying hula. There are all of those implements that are associated with those, right? The pahu, the uli, the ipu, the pu'ili, those accompanying dance implements. But when we think about things that aren't hula related, that are oli, there are a small handful of implements. There's the ʻike, the bamboo, the wooden mouth bowl that's played as well. That Uncle Ka'upena was also very renowned ʻike player and chanter with the ʻike. It's the only stringed instrument, traditional string instrument of Hawaii. And the other implements that have been used in context with oli would be the ohehanuihu, the bamboo nose flute, the hokiokio, the gourd whistle, the oi, the bull roarer, that would accompany chants that aren't hula specific related, that would have the dance. But there are just a small handful of instruments that were used in a non-hula related mele or oli context that would accompany those words.
And as a hula dancer, when you have a good hopa'a, we have an old saying, ile aka hula iko hopa'a. So it's the chanter that makes the hula enjoyable, not necessarily the other way around. And there's that symbiotic relationship. So when I have somebody good chanting for me, then that just brings out the best of the dancer. And the same thing when it's a musician who's singing. There's nothing worse than dancing to a flat musician, or like me. They don't pull that emotion out of you because they're not giving it to you, and there's that understanding of excellence that's happening before your eyes between the dancer and the chanter as well. So we've come to the end, and before we actually end, I'm gonna ask Taylor if she has any announcements. This is our July series of the Nānā ʻike Kumu, the July event of the Nānā ʻike Kumu series. We've been blessed by wonderful audiences at all of our events. Next month will be August 23rd, e Ulua Pa'a. They're going to be honoring Mrs. Pukui posthumously here at the museum. And so every month, and I say this every month, there's going to be something different. And so please, ho'i mai, please return so that we can learn together, we can grow together, and we can also honor the legacy of Mrs. Pukui. And I also want to mahalo the Bishop Museum as well as the Kawena Pukui Cultural Preservation Society, my father right here, La'akea, who's the president, for allowing us this time together in this space to learn in scholarship and aloha. And Taylor, any other announcements you might have?
Oh no, just mahalo nui to Pyle and all of our panelists and for everyone for being here. It's truly an honor for us to be able to hold space for this conversation. So mahalo nui. I have a few handouts on behalf of Library and Archives just to share a little bit more information how to access the resources there. Currently the Archives is going through a fire suppression renovation, so it's not open at the moment. However, there's a lot of materials and resources that are still available online. And also in these handouts here, which I left right on the sort of the edge over there, in the center of the space. There's an email where you can reach out to if you have any specific needs or questions, and the team will get back to you as soon as they can. But a lot of the resources that were referenced during the panel and presentations are accessible at the library and archives, and so please don't hesitate to reach out. It's as Pyle mentioned, we are about halfway through this year's Nānā ʻike Kumu Series. August is going to be our fundraising event. We're also in the process of getting all of the filmed programs that we've had thus far since April available online, so you can view it virtually. In September, we're going to be highlighting Ka'u, the place where Mary Kawena Pukui is from, and we're really excited about that. October and November, we're going to be going deeper into the Hawaiian dictionary and contemporary research. And at the end of the year, in December, in celebration of Founders Day on December 19th, we're going to be facilitating a larger ho'ike on our great lawn celebrating Mary Kawena Pukui and our founder, Bernice Pauahi Bishop. So we are looking forward to seeing everybody again. Thank you so much for being here with us in Pauahi's hale, and really from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much to this amazing panel.
Aye, please, let's give them a round of applause. Pa'i lima.
Oh, nui.
So mahalo for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. Malama pono, everyone. Ahui ho kako. Aloha.